Hi, everyone, and thank you all for being with us this evening. My name is Alex Giannini, and I'm the Associate Program Director at the Westport Library. We've got such a great hour ahead, and we're in the middle of a very exciting week of programs here at the library. Anna Devere Smith last night, the Shortcuts Film Festival tomorrow night, and this evening's behind-the-scenes look at the 2020 election. I want to get right into it, but first a quick note. We want to hear from you during the course of this program, and we want our panel to answer your questions, so please type them in the Ask a Question feature below. Now let's get on to the main event. Jeff Pegues is the CBS News Chief Justice and Homeland Security Correspondent. He reports for all CBS News broadcasts and platforms, including CBS This Morning and the CBS Evening News. Since joining CBS News, Jeff has led the network's coverage of some of the biggest stories of the last decade. He has provided extensive reporting on the conflict between the Black community and police, and has authored a book on the issue, Black and Blue, Inside the Divide Between Police and the Black Community. And as always, when Jeff calls with an idea, we listen. And we thank you so much for bringing this discussion to us. With that, I'm so delighted to introduce Jeff Pegues. Take it away, sir.
All right, Alex, thank you very much. And I should have put in my bio that I went to Staples High School. Grew up in Westport, Connecticut, which is where my love affair with the library started back when I was a kid. So I have a lot of history with the Westport Library. I used to take the minibus to the library. So that was, I don't know, almost 40 years ago. So it's been a while. And since then, I've embarked on this career. Really interesting. In fact, on election night last week, which was Tuesday, if you've forgotten, because it's been such a hectic week for everyone, I went to bed Wednesday morning because I spent all night watching my colleagues at CBS News in this fancy new Times Square election headquarters studio. Nancy Cordes was there. Major Garrett was there, who will be joining us. But then I woke up on Wednesday morning, and the complexion of that race had really changed. And at about 8 o'clock, after getting 3 hours of sleep, 8 o'clock in the morning, I was energized. So among the first things that I did that morning, I shot an email to Bill Harmer, the executive director of the Westport Library. And here's what I said. This election is incredible. No matter who wins, it is historic the way it's unfolding. Imagine, I said in this email, if I corralled Nancy Cordes and Major Garrett, and we discussed how the night unfolded, what the viewers didn't see, what President Trump's surge in the final days of the campaign means, what Biden's win means, et cetera, et cetera. A few minutes later, Bill emailed me back and he said, can you jump on a quick phone call? Bill Harmer is a man of action. That's what I like him. Even though he supports Michigan State, which I have a problem with, he is a man of action. And so I thank him for his support and his vision in helping this series thrive. So, listening to my story here with all of us is my friend and colleague, Nancy Cordes. She is the CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent. She joined CBS News in 2007, and she has really become an irreplaceable voice in our coverage on Capitol Hill and in presidential elections every 4 years. She's as steady as it goes. Nancy, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff, and thanks for such a lovely welcome. I really appreciate it.
I put a lot of thought into that because, I'm always impressed with your work because even in the most stressful situations while I'm losing my hair, you're calm and collected. And which leads me to my first question. What was it like on election night? I mean, the polls seemed to be heavily in Joe Biden's favor, but the race, at least on that night, turned out to be a lot closer.
Right. And I think we got the sense pretty early on that the polls were going to be off, not just because of how close the race was between Joe Biden and Donald Trump all around the country, but also how close a lot of these Senate races were, even though the polling had showed that, it was going to be a blowout in certain states. Polling had Cal Cunningham up by 10 points over Tom Tillis in North Carolina. It had the Maine race neck and neck. This is not just polling from one outlet, it was polling from all the outlets. And so, we were able to see fairly quickly in the night that, a lot of our expectations about the way things were going to go would not come to pass. And in a way, that the fact that our expectations were going to be jostled was pretty familiar territory, because when I think back to all the elections that I've covered, I'd say more than half the time, things do not turn out the way you expect. More than half the time, I'm surprised by something. If you just think back to the 2000 election, Bush versus Gore, nobody could have seen that coming. In 2004, a lot of the early exit polls indicated that John Kerry was the clear winner. And it wasn't until halfway through election night that we realized, this is going in a different way. And it led to a big rethinking of exit polls. In 2010, we had the rise of the Tea Party, and we knew it might be a good night. We didn't expect that it was going to be this huge blowout and that Republicans would storm to victory in the House and retake control. And then, of course, 2016, we all believed, based on polling, based on exit polls and everything else, that Hillary Clinton was likely going to be the next president of the United States. So the fact that things didn't go exactly as planned on Tuesday night, which really felt like it lasted about a week in and of itself, was pretty par for the course, I think.
Yeah, no matter how you try to game it out, it seems these elections are always unpredictable, and this one obviously still continues. And I want the people who are listening to this and seeing this program to know that we see your questions, and they're adding up in our column here, including the one that wonders whether journalists can be impartial. So that is the question, one of them at least, that I want answered. Okay. And I'll address that later. But at this moment, the president hasn't conceded.
Right.
The Senate is still up in the air.
Right.
This is really unusual. You just don't see this kind of thing in the United States of America, right, where the transition, at least initially, is anything but smooth. I mean, of course, you bring in the year 2000 and what happened, but this is still unusual.
Right. And, if you think back to 2016, the margin of victory for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton was much closer than what we are seeing right now in 2020. And the fact that he won was a much greater shock than the fact that Joe Biden has won in 2020, just based on the polling. And so, all of the people who are now saying, well, it's still up in the air, it hasn't been certified, they didn't feel that way 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton conceded the next morning. She said, this is obviously not the outcome I wanted, but, we have to give him all of our support and give him an opportunity to succeed. There may have been a couple of court cases, I don't even recall, back in 2016, because the story sort of marched on. Nobody seriously thought that any kind of recount or hand count or audit was going to change the results of the election. Democrats and Republicans, certainly Democrats, were incredibly unhappy about the results, but they didn't claim that President Trump hadn't actually, won in the Electoral College, because it was pretty clear that he did. And so we are, as you say, completely in uncharted territory. And I think, it's a very unsettled feeling on Capitol Hill right now, because these are lawmakers who are pretty comfortable playing their assigned roles, and they usually know what those assigned roles are. And it's a little unclear right now exactly how long they should allow the current situation to go on. Just from speaking to Republicans behind the scenes, off the record, what they say is that, of course, yes, Major.
Hey, look who's here.
Can you hear us? No? Oh,
You
no.
still can't hear us.
Ugh, rat.
All right, so we can hear Major. He's still working
trying
out his technical issues.
Okay.
Alex, we can take him off screen and maybe bring him back.
No.
It is frustrating sometimes.
Yes, that's actually, you're getting a little taste of what our lives have been like the last 8 months.
That's right.
Doing all of these stories on Zoom and live shots from all over the place, and suddenly being forced to be your own tech person, which is not my strength. So it's frustrating. But anyway, what I was saying was that, the current situation is that I think Republicans all acknowledge, when you talk to them privately, yes, we know that Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States, but they feel, for a variety of reasons, that they can't be the one because they feel like it would mean, they worry that he would actually get more dug in if he felt like he was being pushed out the door by his own party, that perhaps he would prolong things. And then B, they realize that their supporters are Donald Trump supporters, and they just don't want to be they want the courts to be the ones basically to deliver the bad news. They want the courts to shut down these legal challenges that are coming to them without much basis. And they would rather have that bad news come from the courts than from them. The problem is, how long do you let this go on? Because it seems that the president's legal team continues to file new legal challenges all the time. So how long do Republicans kind of allow this to drag out before they speak up is a really is an unknown question. And I think what gives it more urgency is the fact that the president is now installing loyalists in a few different agencies, most notably at the Pentagon, firing the Secretary of Defense and a few other top officials. And if that continues, that may lead Republicans to speak up in a way that they haven't so far.
Well, and let's talk about that a little, because there is a lot of concern across the country about these moves at the Pentagon and what they really mean and what is the backstory here. So we have a question from Steve Stein, who says, will the president replacing the heads of DOD, CIA, and FBI be viewed as spiteful actions or preparing to seize power? It's hard to tell what the president is thinking.
Right. It is hard. And I think that, even for people inside his White House, it is sometimes difficult to divine his motivation. Some of the moves seem like they were planned. Certainly, the president has made no secret that he was frustrated with his Secretary of Defense. He may have wanted to fire him beforehand and was told by his aides, don't fire him before the election, it'll look bad. And so he's simply settling scores now. But the problem is, A, that we don't know for sure exactly what the goals are, and B, some of the people that he's placing in these positions are individuals who were considered for congressionally appointed positions in the past, and basically the White House was told no go by its own party, by Republicans in the Senate, because they had a history of, in one case, racist comments, calling the President Obama a terrorist, and just were not seen as fit for those jobs. And now suddenly the president is putting them in those jobs. And so I think, one big question on the minds of a lot of lawmakers is this it? Did he kind of get it out of his system? And people will be in these roles for a couple of months and then there will be a transfer of power? Or is this just the beginning and there are several more moves to come. And I think nobody really knows the answer to that right now.
Who do you think, and obviously you followed this relationship over the last 3.5 years or so, 4 years. How would you describe the dynamic between Mitch McConnell and President Trump? Are they friends? Are these just business transactions? What is going on behind the scenes in your view?
I'm not sure I would call them friends. And I think that there is, I think that it is a transactional relationship in which Mitch McConnell has learned through trial and error over time how to best, in his view, work with the president, sometimes manipulate the president, get what he wants out of that relationship. And while McConnell can sometimes, even more so than a lot of other Republicans, in discrete situations, because he's got kind of that deadpan drawl, he seems to be able sometimes to criticize the president in a way that others are reluctant, but that's still quite rare. I would say most of the time when we ask him about controversial or inappropriate things that the president has done or said, he will usually find a way to bat it away and not comment or express support for the president, because he understands that, in order to do everything that he wants to do, he needs to have a good working relationship with the president, and he's willing to kind of take the heat for not condemning things that are said or done that are inappropriate, if that means he's going to be able to have a better relationship with the president to do what he wants to do. A perfect example most recently was when the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, was really making a lot of progress in negotiations with Nancy Pelosi over a big $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package. And the president was, egging him on, let's do this. Remember, for a while, the president was saying, I want an even bigger package than Nancy Pelosi wants, even after he had, blown this up because it was getting too big. But he knew that it might be a good thing for his reelection effort to have a big stimulus package, have checks going out the door. And this was not great news to Mitch McConnell, because the Republicans in the Senate wanted to pass a much smaller package, maybe a quarter of the size, if that. He had a lot of Republican senators who didn't want to pass anything at all. So this was going to put Mitch McConnell in a very uncomfortable position if Nancy Pelosi and Steven Mnuchin did come to some kind of an agreement, and then that package were to be put on the Senate floor. He did not want that to happen, especially right before an election. And so in a meeting with the president, he basically said the kinds of things that, he knew would kind of press the president's buttons. He said, Nancy Pelosi is playing you. She's just stringing this along. She just wants to, she's just using you to kind of make you look bad before an election. And sure enough, within hours, the president was blowing up the deal and walking away. And so, that served McConnell's purposes of in that moment. And the reason that he was able to have that kind of influence on the president is because he is so careful not to cross the president publicly unless he feels he really, really needs to.
Doesn't want to alienate the president's supporters, certainly. 71 million plus,
Right.
according to the latest count today, which is really remarkable.
Yeah.
You were going to say something?
Nope. I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, so I'm here with Nancy Cordes. We are waiting for Major Garrett, Chief Washington Correspondent for CBS News. He's trying to join us. From what we're being told, he is having technical issues. So in the meantime, Nancy and I will continue to have this nice, intimate conversation with about 300 people and some questions ahead. We're about 25 minutes in, so time is flying by.
Wow.
So let's talk about, from Mitch McConnell to Mitch McConnell's relationship with the president-elect. There's history there.
Right. So, they have a long time relationship. They served in the Senate together for 22 years. And they served in the Senate together in an era where compromise was not a dirty word the way that it is now. They were in the Senate in an era where, the two sides negotiated on big deals, and that was sort of how it worked, and it was unremarkable. And the Senate was the cooling saucer in the parlance of the founders, meant for cooler heads to prevail.
Do you think, Nancy, that we can ever get back to those days?
I have to be honest with you, Jeff. I'm pretty pessimistic right now. I think that all the incentives are in the wrong direction. All the incentives are not to deny the other side a win, to do what is going to make your primary voters, voters in a primary election happy, and that means currying favor with your base, and especially on the right. I do think compromise among the Republican primary voters as the Republican Party has shrunk, and you've got a lot of people who still identify with Republican lawmakers, but they consider themselves independent. That makes it harder, I think, sometimes for Republican lawmakers to move to the middle, because the Republican Party voters who control their fate are looking for the most conservative candidate. Now, Mitch McConnell, that said, Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden do have a longtime relationship. Mitch McConnell has said that he trusts Joe Biden implicitly. The two of them worked very closely on a number of big deals when Joe Biden was vice president. President Obama would dispatch Biden to the Hill, knowing that Biden had deeper relationships and a deeper understanding of how to get to compromise on the Hill than President Obama did, who had only been there for a few years. And in fact, the knock on Biden from some of his Democratic colleagues was that he was too eager to make a deal with Mitch McConnell, that he loved the art of deal making so much that sometimes they felt he gave away too much. And one would think that McConnell, who has known him as long as he is and is a very shrewd negotiator himself, is very aware of that dynamic. But, I will say that just because they work well together does not necessarily mean that we're about to embark on some period of bipartisanship. McConnell, famously said he wanted to make President Obama a one-term president, and I don't see why he would have any different of a goal with Vice President Biden, whether he likes him personally or not. He is going to want to see the White House fall back into Republican hands, and if denying Joe Biden big legislative victories is one way that he thinks he can do that, then he's going to do it.
Well, Biden, as far as the transition is concerned, he is moving ahead. He doesn't have the federal funds,
right,
because the GSA won't release them until the results of the election are certified. So we're learning a lot about how the government works or doesn't work during a transition. So,
and you know what, Jeff? I think, we're all learning that, because I didn't know how that process worked before now either, because it's always just been a formality. It's not ever been something that you needed to report on, because it's just a formality. If somebody, appears to have won the presidential election, the GSA certifies it, and that $7 million gets released, and the transition team gets office space at the Department of Commerce. And, then you have all of these team members who have been assembled at the Biden camp, they all go into the agencies and they start getting briefings and they start meeting with officials and they get big briefing books normally. And here's an interesting factoid. So the Biden camp has 500 people that it had already assembled. These are researchers and former administration officials and lawyers who were all ready to go into all of these agencies. That's more people than any other presidential transition has ever assembled. I think President Obama had 370. And the reason that they had such a robust transition team led by very senior people, much more senior people than you normally see within the Biden orbit, is because they knew that this was going to be such a rocky transition. Even if the GSA had signed off on it by now, they didn't know how much cooperation they were going to get within these various agencies. They didn't know whether the Trump administration would have sort of done the work that you're supposed to do ahead of time to get all these briefing books together to hand over to the next administration. They just didn't know exactly what they were going to encounter, but they knew it was probably not going to be the typical transition process. And so they have this huge team, and they're now just waiting to see when they're going to get access to the various agencies. And this is something that I'm sure you can speak to, is that intelligence officials have determined in the past that we are most vulnerable during times of presidential transition from a security perspective, because our enemies believe that those are times when we are focused inward. We're not as outwardly focused, keeping an eye on threats around the world, because there's a lot of chaos and change at home. So it's not, to some people, it may seem sort of like a sideshow, but it actually has real life consequences if this transition is not clear cut. If the incoming administration doesn't have enough time to meet with the outgoing administration and understand what they've done, what they haven't done, just on things like Operation Warp Speed, getting vaccines ready and mobilized to go out to hundreds of millions of Americans. These are the kinds of things you really don't want to see falling through the cracks at such a pivotal time.
Yeah, it is. It is so important. And what you mentioned there with how important it is to have that seamless transition was something that came out of the 9/11 report,
exactly.
Right? In the after action report, they determined that because there were delays in the transition in 2000, President Bush was not armed, if you will, with all the information that he needed and the administration needed to counter this threat. Some people might see that as an excuse, to be quite honest, because frankly, the FBI during that period had been trying to sound alarms, people within the FBI, that, hey, Al-Qaeda is a growing threat. Al-Qaeda is a growing threat. But we just weren't paying attention,
Right.
Which is why it is important, to your point, that there is this seamless transition where you are cooperating and sharing information, and everyone, especially the president-elect, is up to speed on the emerging threats and any current threats that the Trump administration may be facing. So yeah, there are real life consequences here that aren't addressed when you have this lack of symphony, if you will, this lack of cooperation. Do we have Major, and can he hear us?
Oh.
I can hear you, Jeff.
Okay.
The adjustments continue, but I hear you.
All right,
Okay,
we made it. Now, can we get you right
sideways,
side up?
There you go.
Well, all right.
Much better. Okay. Major, how are you? I know you must
This
be
was
frustrated.
5 devices and about 35 tries.
Oh no.
All right. We'll try to get you focused on other things.
Nothing if not persistent for you.
You are. That's why you are successful. That's why you are the CBS News Chief Washington correspondent, the host of The Takeout, which is an interview show available on top radio stations across the country and all podcast platforms. He is also the author of 4 books.
Correct, sir.
Including his latest, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride. Well, Major has had a wild ride of his own. We were just talking about the transition. Gosh, wild ride, I think, is apropos for that as well. What are your thoughts on how this is going?
Yeah. So let me just do one more camera adjustment. So it's going worse than it should because it's later than it should be. We had a close election in 2016 that surprised a lot of people and shook up the political universe. And you know what happened? The networks called it. Hillary conceded and the transition began. That's how I know these things can happen. Nancy and I observed it with our very eyes. So when the president tweeted earlier this week, since when did the media call elections? Well, how about since 2016? Now, there's been some commentary that this is dangerous, and there are aspects of it that are less than secure and less than reassuring, but I don't think it's dangerous in the sense that former Vice President Biden, now President-elect Biden, doesn't know where things are. He knows where things are. His team knows where things are. He probably approaches this job with the most cumulative experience, executive and legislative, of any president in modern American, possibly all of American history. He knows how transitions go. He knows the work he wanted to do. Because of the pandemic, a good deal of the transition would have been conducted virtually or at remote from work from home ways anyway. They wouldn't have all piled in, about 600 people into the GSA designated facility. So in the grand scheme of things, a few days isn't going to matter monumentally, at least not for this team. It would with another team. Say you're coming as a governor from, I don't know, let's pick a state, Texas, Arkansas. So there isn't that. I don't think there's a calamity coming because this transition is delayed. But there is a reckoning coming, and the Republicans who are appeasing the president right now are going to inherit a whirlwind, one way or the other. Either his supporters won't believe it when if ever he concedes, or when and if he ever concedes, they'll believe it, but they'll be aggrieved and perpetually aggrieved. And if Republicans think that sense of grievance either works for them or doesn't have any consequences for them, I think they're kidding themselves.
And we're, Major, just so you know, we're trying to answer viewer questions. And Brian Sobelman,
Sure.
Either one of you can take this. Brian Sobelman is wondering, why isn't there a law that requires the incumbent administration to transition according to a schedule? That's a good question.
There is.
Oh.
There is a law, and it's called I think it's called the Presidential Transition Act. Don't hold me to that, something to that effect.
Yep.
And basically what it says is that the Government Services Administration, which is an agency that no one spends too much time thinking about most of the time, this is basically the agency involved of procurement. They get the pencils and the computers and office space for all the other agencies so they can all function. And, as I was saying before, it's usually a formality. The GSA administrator, who in this case is appointed by the president, so she therefore has some loyalty to this president, must ascertain that someone has won the election, and then that sets into motion that process where the transition automatically gets $7 million to pay all the people who are kind of the government in waiting for a couple of months until Joe Biden is sworn in on January 20th, 2021. So they get the money to pay them. They get office space, which, as Major rightly points out, will mostly go unused because everybody's working from home in a pandemic anyway. And that gives them the authority, all these transition team members, to go into all the various agencies and start to get briefed. So there is a law, and the only problem now is that because the president of the United States is not acknowledging that his opponent won the election, then the woman who works for him, who is in admittedly a very difficult situation and very delicate, she is not ascertaining under the language of the law that Biden has won either. And so that's why everything is frozen.
Yeah, so they have essentially found
The Obama GSA administrator did.
He did what?
She did. The Obama administrator, the GSA, as soon as the networks called the race in 2016 for Trump and Hillary conceded, the very next day ascertained the winner of the election and set the transition in motion.
Okay, and so
Donald Trump got more than he's giving to Joe Biden.
So did not wait for the vote to be officially certified.
Right, because that takes weeks. Every state is on a different timeline in terms of how quickly they actually certify the votes in their election. So if you were to wait until every single state certified their results, the transition team might lose a month. And when you've only got about 2.5 months, that's a significant chunk of time.
Let me give this question to you, Major. This is coming from Nell and Lynch. Do you think the Republican leadership, McConnell and Graham, will politically suffer for not supporting the results of the election?
They very well might. I mean, that's going to be up to the American people. In the first place, we will see that visited will be Georgia, not the most, not the place where you might see that negative reaction appear most demonstrably. But if there was ever a time that Democrats who historically have underperformed in turnouts might overperform, this would be it. The consequences are large, not just in terms of who controls the U.S. Senate, but in mobilizing people that were just mobilized for a big national election and moving Georgia from red to blue. We're going to get the first read on this idea. Now, there are Republicans who I'm sure have told Nancy, because they've told me, well, we need to give the president space because we don't want to antagonize him and depress turnout in Georgia. Okay, that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is the longer we let this go on, the more we're going to antagonize the very people who came out against us in the Atlanta suburbs specifically, but other parts of the state as well. So it's a risky maneuver, but it has been from the very beginning with President Trump and the Republicans in the Senate in particular. And they have always defaulted to a strategy of deference. Some might and some have described it as supine, spineless deference. I'll leave that to others. I'll just say what other people have said. But they're also trying to imagine, and Nancy might have a better perspective on this than I do because her conversations are fresher. They might be trying to imagine a post-Trump world, and I'm not sure they figured out what that looks like or importantly sounds like. And I'm not even sure the president knows what that's going to look or sound like. But I do know Republicans quake at the prospect of the president almost declaring immediately that he's going to run for re-election or he's keeping his options open and wants to be a part of this ongoing Republican conversation, legislatively or otherwise.
Nancy?
I think that a post-Trump world for Republicans in Congress is still pretty Trumpian. First, because the president has made noises about wanting to run again in 2024. People around him, at least, have said that. And second, because GOP voters have made it pretty clear that they often favor Trump over a lot of these Republican lawmakers. So I don't think that is going to change overnight. And part of the reason that these Republican leaders are reluctant to acknowledge the outcome of the election is because they worry that with these two Georgia races coming up that Major talked about, if their voters, believe that President Trump has lost, they're worried that those voters are going to be demoralized and that they won't show up. That seems like a pretty short-sighted strategy because sometime between now and January 5th, when those two Georgia runoffs happen, those voters are going to get the news once and for all that, that the president has lost. So it seems, it's not a winning strategy. And the other problem is that if you allow the idea to fester and grow within your party that there was this, rampant election fraud that took place, how are you then going to motivate your voters to go out and vote in the next election? You're basically implying that somehow there was voter fraud in Georgia, but hey, please go vote in Georgia. So there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, but clearly they feel that that's still their best hand to play at this point.
Okay, let's move ahead. Steve Stein. He wonders, will President Trump pardon, Steve says, everyone around him of any potential illegal acts they performed under his authority? Will he, you know what a good question is? Because I heard this. Someone was speculating that he might pardon himself. Is that possible?
I have heard that it is. I don't know if it's never been tried, so we don't have any case law on this.
Well, so now would be a great time to try it. We're trying out new things these days.
If he were to do it early in 2021, it would be an extension of 2020, and 2020 has been a time of, well, we've never seen that before. So it would be consistent with the year we've just lived through.
Exactly.
And there are predecessors of this president who have pardoned people under circumstances that certainly their political opponents found to be fishy and somewhat scandalous. The pardon powers are, as they have been described, fancy SAT 50-cent word, plenary. He can do it. Whether he can do it to himself, I don't know. And I'm of the mind that doing so could be legally challenged. He doesn't know what the legal waters would be for that. And if he lost that, he would essentially have convicted himself already and would have made the prosecutors at, let's say, the state of New York, or if, let's say, for example, Joe Biden were to reappoint the fired U.S. attorneys in the Southern District of New York, the Eastern District of New York, and Washington, D.C., they would have ample cause to pursue whatever prosecutorial matters were interrupted by their dismissal at the hands of this president. So, yes, he could do it, but when you have no case law and no precedent and I wouldn't even say you'd have better than a 50-50 chance of success with that, that's a big risk, because if you lose that, presidents can't pardon themselves, Constitution doesn't say it, our legal system doesn't allow for it, you've essentially failed in pardoning yourself, but publicly indicted yourself.
All right, well done answering that question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a question from Dan Woog, my old soccer coach from 40 years ago, and everybody in Westport's favorite soccer coach. He says, or he's wondering, should we be worried about shenanigans in the Electoral College or in January when Congress meets to certify the electors' votes? Nancy.
Let's hope not. I mean, I think that would be a very troubling sign for our democracy if there were shenanigans within the Electoral College or in Congress certifying the votes. I was just listening this evening to an interview that Oklahoma Senator James Langford did, Republican, who's really, really knowledgeable and reasonable, but yet has his finger on the pulse of his own conference. And he was saying that he does not anticipate that will happen now, because as Major says, this is the year of things that we don't expect taking place. You can never say never, but at this point, you would imagine that in most states, especially in a swing state, if there were shenanigans, which is a word I love, among state electors, there would be a pretty massive backlash. So I think that is fairly unlikely.
I agree.
Now I have to find
agree.
some wood to knock on.
I was just thinking the same thing. Knock on wood. Major, you agree?
I do. The public backlash would be instantaneous and would make what we regarded and what we observed in the streets of America on the Saturday, the day of the election was called, look puny by comparison. People would take to the streets. People would take to the streets, even in the states where this wasn't happening, to protect democracy. And they would be justified in doing so.
Okay, let's hope that doesn't happen. All right, so let's look ahead. As we discussed earlier, the Biden administration or transition is moving ahead, and we're starting to see that names are being tossed about. Ron Klain, who's a Biden friend, Biden insider for chief of staff.
Yep.
Tell us about him.
Well, Ron Klain was his chief of staff when he was vice president. He was also major chief of staff for Al Gore, correct?
Mm-hmm.
When Al Gore was vice president.
Yeah, and if you go back and watch the movie Recount, you will see Ron Klain's role in the Florida recount cinematically and most masterfully conveyed. Ron Klain was on the losing side of the Florida recount, but he was central to then Vice President Gore's fight for the presidency in the Florida recount. He also was the Ebola coordinator for the Obama administration during the Ebola crisis. He is very skilled, very knowledgeable, and deeply trusted by President-elect Biden. And that announcement that it's first is not a surprise, that it's him is not a surprise. And the one thing that President-elect Biden does is he invests in people who stay with him for a very long time. They love working for him and they don't go away. And that's not always true in politics. And that's both a strength and a weakness, because they have a great familiarity and they have a great attachment to him. And sometimes that makes them less candid than they otherwise would be, but it also means they know him very well, know his instincts. They can finish each other's sentences, and they're incredibly comfortable, and we'll build a team out together that way.
And I don't know if you caught this in Major's answer to that question, but now we know what he does on his weekends when he's not watching the San Diego Padres. He gave up the Chargers, he tells me, but so he's watching political movies about the 2000 recount.
Among other things, yes.
Okay. All right, so what about some of the other major posts? Secretary of State.
There's a long line of people who would be interested in that position, as you can imagine. Some of the names you've probably heard: Chris Coons, who is who took Vice President Biden's Senate seat. He is the senator from Delaware. He sits on the Foreign Relations Committee, very involved and passionate about foreign affairs, has traveled all over the world as a foreign relations member, and obviously has a very close relationship with the vice president because of his because of where he's from. There is still talk that Susan Rice might be a contender for that position as well. It just depends on sort of the president-elect's appetite for what will certainly be, especially if Republicans maintain control of the Senate, a huge battle over her nomination, because Republicans have a particular animosity towards her. And then there's Tony Blinken, who's also been discussed as a possible national security advisor, and I think sounds at this point like he's more likely to end up as national security advisor than Secretary of State. He's again someone from the longtime member of the Biden orbit who would be returning to the Biden orbit. He was the deputy national security advisor in the Obama administration and a deputy Secretary of State. So, you can see him sliding into a key foreign affairs role as well. Major, who else am I forgetting.
So
the Secretary of State sweepstakes.
The parlor game in Washington of names is something we get obsessed with. I would just like, before we run out of time, say a couple of things about what I think the early trajectory of the administration will be. Because one thing I learned, and I think the nation learned, some with enthusiastic response, some with very frightened and appalled response, is how much the president administratively can do to influence immigration policy. President Trump didn't change a single law when it comes to immigration, not one. But administratively, he used every ounce of muscle, some of it never even used before by any previous president, to change funding, to move Pentagon funds in new and different ways, winning more than losing in court challenges over that, and using the administrative reach of existing immigration law to take the most punitive approach imaginable. That will be reversed in the exact same way it was set in motion administratively by this administration. And part of that will be easing, if not rewriting entirely, the what came to be called the Muslim travel ban, the ban of the 7 countries that were identified by the Trump administration. And I think Nancy will also be able to speak to this. Whatever the range of ambitions were before election night, when there were lots of Democrats who felt confident that there would be not only a Democratic majority, but maybe a 2 or 3 seat Democratic majority in the Senate, whatever those ambitions were have to be drawn back, because there's going to have to be an arrangement made with this narrow Senate majority, whichever party controls it after the 2 Georgia runoffs. And that's going to constrain the big ambitions to the degree they existed for President-elect Biden on the progressive side. And I know that those in the audience will say, God, we hear you idiots in Washington talk about infrastructure every year and it never happens. I know that's true. Fair criticism. But if there's something that could be bipartisan initially, that would not be sexy, but that would be meaningful and that could possibly get done, I would put that on the list.
Hey, Jeff, we were just scooped by one of our viewers here, Bill, who points out that at 8 o'clock this evening, Ron Klain was in fact named by the president-elect as Chief of Staff.
Oh.
Yeah, he was.
All right.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So we're
I knew
getting
that.
news
I
from
was
our
sort of acting as if it had already been known. Yes, that's true.
Okay, good. All right, so AG, I have some ideas. Sally Yates, perhaps. I mean, she did do some sort of ad for Biden during the DNC, didn't she? Who else do you think? Paul Patrick?
Doug Jones, yeah.
Doug
Jones. So people are talking about Doug Jones?
He again has a long time relationship with Joe Biden. They got to know each other far earlier in their careers. So I have to, you have to sort of think that he'd be in the running. But again, there's a huge list of talented people who could very easily hold that position. So
and all those things. So Doug Jones, former colleague of senators, that never hurts. There's no seat replacement issue to be dealt with there. Same thing would be true of Chris Coons. And I think for confirmation processes and confirmation speed processes, considerations like that will take on a bigger dimension than they would have had the Democrats won what they thought they were going to win, but didn't when it comes to a Senate majority.
And it's one reason why I think Elizabeth Warren is very unlikely to be named to a cabinet post, because taking her out of the Senate would enable the Republican governor of Massachusetts to name a temporary replacement. And, Democrats have had bad luck in special elections in Massachusetts in recent history. And also they learned the hard way about taking Democrats out of their, either positions in the Senate or governorships during the Obama administration. Joe Biden was there for that, and realizing, if you take people out of their seats in purple states, there is no guarantee that your party is going to win that seat back in a special election. And so I think that he would be very reluctant to do that.
All right. What about Bernie Sanders, who I think on one of our competitors sort of made it clear that he would be open to becoming labor secretary. Isn't that a job that he could have if he asked for it?
I'm not sure. Sanders, for the incredible following that he has developed in the country, does not have that strong of a reputation for working with others on Capitol Hill. He is seen as someone who has kind of always gone his own way, trying to push his party in another direction, not necessarily as concerned with the art of the possible as he is concerned with inspiring people to see what could be possible down the road. And I think that might hurt his chances of getting a cabinet position, because Biden may feel that that it would be more difficult to get Bernie rowing in the same direction that everyone else is rowing in, or that Vice President Biden would like him to row in if Senator Sanders has different ideas.
Okay, so it's 8:31. We're going to go over a little bit just to make up for the time that we lost. And we're still getting questions, and we still have a large audience. So I want to ask you both about what Joe Biden is going to do first. He's already hinted at rejoining the Paris climate agreement, the Iran nuclear weapons deal. So is he going to undo what President Trump has done, just as President Trump tried to undo what President Obama did?
Short answer, yes. Yes. And this is another reason why the transition dialogues are not as as interesting or helpful as they might otherwise be, because they're not going to go like this. Well, existing Trump administration State Department, what are your thoughts about the Iran nuclear deal? They know they hate it, and they got out of it. And the incoming Biden administration knows they want to get back into it. There's no conversation there. Same thing with the World Health Organization. So, Trump administration, what are your real thoughts about the World Health Organization? We hate it. Oh, well, we like it. Okay, end of conversation. I mean, that's why some of these transition things are just boom. They're just 180s. And as soon as they get in, they'll reorient. Same thing on the Paris climate deal. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, one of the things I'm most interested in talking to the president-elect about is future climate policy. Europeans are already reorienting themselves to this idea that America is going to join that conversation. Will half of the country really like that? Yes. Will maybe some 40 or 30% be really upset about that? Yes. But that's also not a transition conversation that's going to have a lot of texture to it. And the things that are at that level that can be dealt with will be dealt with swiftly. So there will be this sense of action and this sense of movement early on, but things that have to go down legislative tracks, as Nancy very well knows, that's going to be navigated gradually, and the coalition building will be comported.
Yeah, because
I do think I agree with everything Major just said, and I think that beyond that, the early portion of his presidency is just going to be dominated by coronavirus. I think that his presidency will really be judged by how he handles this crisis, which could be far worse just in 2 months when he takes office. And that is something that he will, that he's going to inherit, and that he'll be defined by. And so he said that that's going to be his first priority. And I wouldn't be surprised if that really sucks up a lot of the oxygen in the early days.
And there's always this risk that the new administration could go too far to the left. I mean, we've already seen some infighting.
Right. And I think, it won't be possible for them to go too far to the left if Republicans maintain control of the Senate, because that will affect everything from who Biden nominates, because he may feel that, really liberal nominees will get held up in the Senate. And it'll certainly affect the kind of legislation that he pushes for and tries to pass. So Interestingly, that mistake that you point out that a lot of administrations make, it may not be possible for him to make that mistake if there is a Republican Senate, in which case, that might save him from some of the losses that administrations typically experience in their first midterm election after a new president is elected. So, but that's several chess pieces down the road at this point, and it all kind of depends on what happens on January 5th in Georgia.
Okay,
and one of the things he could do, and this is sometimes appealing to incoming presidents, and that is to call the bluff of the opposition party. And there's one issue I think that the President-elect Biden could call the bluff on and see what happens. Because in the home stretch of the campaign, not only President Trump, but Republicans down ballot, when they were asked questions about race and justice and police and all that sort of stuff, said, we want to fund the police, point one, obviously, but we have to give President Trump due credit for the First Step Act, and we need to do more. Okay. President-elect Biden could say, let's talk. Let's deal with this. What's the next step of criminal justice reform? You said you're for it. You criticized President Obama for not getting it done. President Trump got Republican votes. I'm asking for your votes now. Let's go. And how Republicans orient themselves to the politics and the rhetoric that came out of their own mouths, not 5 years ago, 5 minutes ago, on this issue could be a place where the president-elect could at least begin a conversation and not be accused of going wildly left, but taking their words and treating them seriously and saying, this is the next step. What is the next step? Let's work it out. And it would be responsive also to one of the important moments and the lingering moments of 2020.
Okay, let's take a couple of steps back, because what you just said has brought something to mind that really stood out to me, that on Saturday night I couldn't discuss standing in the middle of Black Lives Matter Plaza. But it's an issue that stood out to me as I was listening to President-elect Biden's speech. He gave this very public nod to Black women. I have your back. That was unusual. But what was his message in putting that line in his speech?
So what I took that to mean was that Black women who have been, really the backbone of the Democratic Party when it comes to getting Democrats elected, but have not necessarily always gotten the credit that they deserve for that, for being extremely loyal Democratic voters. I felt that was Joe Biden saying, I see you, I'm grateful to you, I respect you, you are seen by this presidency, and furthermore, I selected a Black running mate because it's another way to acknowledge your importance to this party and to my victory.
Did he have to say that?
I don't think it hurt. I think that it was an important moment, again, especially as you look towards Georgia, where 30% or so of the electorate is African American, and I think it was important for him to say it out loud, especially to a portion of the electorate that has not felt that it was seen and respected in the way that it should be.
So when you're putting together a speech at a moment like that, you always want to get to the place where you're ahead of the conventional wisdom or the zeitgeist. Would it have been conspicuous if Biden hadn't said it? Would 100 people have said, where was that line? No. But it still would have been a gaffe to not say it, because there is no Joe Biden nomination without African-American women, period, end of story. Saying I have your back is a recognition that they had his. And it works on two levels. And it's It has the vitality of originality, because it hasn't been said before. And then it creates this conversation we're having now. What does he mean by it? Well, guess what? Guess who gets to answer that question? The new president of the United States, because he wrote it and he said it. And that allows a conversation to occur that pressurizes his administration. It's inviting that pressure. So you have originality, you have a pressure point, and you create a dialogue. And I think all of those things were intentions.
All right. Well, so as we wrap this up, I want to put the spotlight on us because we have a question here from Wendy Brown, and I think it's a good one because she says, it's been an exhausting 4 years for the public, and especially for you reporters. Have you enjoyed the past 5 days when the president has had no public comments other than tweets? And are you looking forward to reporting on a more traditional administration? I'm going to give my 2 cents on that. I am exhausted. I am tired. There's been a lot. It's every day you wake up and there's something happening. And these things turn into these huge stories. And, just think about the stories that we've covered over the last 4 years. The Russia investigation and impeachment that people don't even talk about anymore. And how many more stories, major stories, can we list? So what is your answer to that question, Nancy?
I am tired too. And actually the last 5 days has not been much of a break, even though it's been a little quieter on the tweet front. Because I'm still on Capitol Hill and trying to figure out what lawmakers are going to say and do about all this. It has been even it's been physically exhausting, but more so mentally exhausting to sort of go to Capitol Hill every day, and because you have so many lawmakers who are determined not to show any distance from President Trump, either deny that anything unusual has happened, or stick with him when privately they're telling you something completely different. So that's a little bit of a disorienting experience. And beyond that, I studied public policy. I like covering debates about policy. I like covering issues. And yes, it will be a relief not to be asking lawmakers about tweets anymore. And look, those tweets are important. This is the president of the United States making these pronouncements via tweet, so they're consequential. But at the same time, they are here today, gone tomorrow. And if there are policy debates to be had once again about infrastructure, about the climate, about healthcare, about anything, that will be a very refreshing change.
Major.
So we're all tired. I take the administrations as they come. I try not to get emotionally involved one way or the other. But this is a tiring administration for all the reasons that you've discussed and that Nancy has discussed. But there's going to have to be an accountability quotient for Joe Biden. He has to answer for what he does and says, and we have to be just as aggressive and tough with him as we were with President Trump. And if we're not going to be doing our jobs. And I don't imagine the president-elect will be as belligerent about the truth as Donald Trump was, but I know he'll shade it. Every politician. And this isn't patty cake. This is the most important position in American politics, and we have to treat it as such, no matter who the occupant.
Okay, Major, Nancy, thank you. We could go on, but I'm sure people have other things they have to do tonight at 8:45. But thank you. It's been a lot of fun, and this exceeded my expectations. So I thank you for your time. Major, thank you for joining us, and sorry about those technical glitches.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having us.
All right, guys.
On behalf of the library, to the three of you, thank you all so much for being here. What a great talk. Jeff, thank you so much for bringing this to us. And Nancy and Major, thank you so much for your insight. And after a week that was very stressful for a lot of people. So thank you all. And Major, thank you so much for just not giving up tonight.
Alex, can I mention one more thing?
Sure.
You know that on December 1st, we're going to have another virtual conversation about the power of sports. Former Yankee great Dave Winfield, WNBA star Candace Parker, and former Knicks star Charles Smith will be my guest. And we're going to delve into the social justice movement and how it is shaping sports. So that's December 1st, and I hope you can all tune in.
For sure. And you can register right on westportlibrary.org. Again, to you three, thank you so much for being here. And to everybody watching tonight, thank you. Stay safe, be well, and good night.
Thanks. Bye.